There has been a steady session of military exercises among Seoul, Washington and Tokyo as the three countries seek to strengthen their combined defense posture against regional security threats posed by Pyongyang. So are these combined military drills keeping North Korea's provocations at bay? What are the implications of Russia seeking security talks with North Korea and China? And how do such trilateral security interactions look to affect South Korea's bilateral ties with Russia and China? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week during which we touch upon stories here on the peninsula, making headlines, of course, elsewhere as well. And for this, I have Thomas Maresca here in the studio with me. Thomas, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here.
I also have Andres Sanchez Braun with us. Andres, as always, welcome.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Thomas, let's begin then with details about the Seoul, Washington anti-submarine warfare exercise near Guam, I believe.
Yes, it wrapped up Sunday. It's a biennial exercise. It's called Silent Shark. It's basically a sub and kind of reconnaissance maritime patrol craft exercise, basically to practice coordinating and tracking and responding to underwater threats. I mean, it's not something that's unusual. It's been around since 2006 or 2007. But, you know, I guess it's interesting in the scope of how it fits into this context of just this really increased and consistent cooperation between U.S. and South Korea in terms of military exercises and, you know, the tempo and the scope of them as well. And, you know, this month we've also seen the arrival of an aircraft carrier in Busan, a B-52 bomber arrived here as well. So, you know, it fits within that context, but, you know, it wasn't anything, I think, unusual on its own.
And Thomas, do you suppose these steady sessions, if I may, of military exercises are perhaps keeping North Korea's provocations at bay?
It's always hard to try to guess what drives decisions in North Korea, but we haven't seen a missile launch in a while, that's true. Although I think historically the greater number of exercises has kind of had the opposite effect. I mean, North Korea has often used U.S.-South Korean joint drills as a pretext for conducting its own tests, or at the very least making belligerent statements. I mean, they always frame the justification for their weapons development as a response to the rising tensions and hostilities on the peninsula caused by the U.S. and sort of South Korea as a puppet of Washington, as they would put it. So historically, I think it's had the opposite effect. This time around, I think most observers are waiting to see if North Korea is going to launch this. They're trying to make a third attempt at launching a military reconnaissance satellite into orbit. They've already said they were going to do it in October. The month's almost over. You know, we still don't know if that's going to happen or if there is a delay, why. But so I would say, generally speaking, it's not the type of thing that slows down North Korea. I mean, I'm sure they're aware of it and maybe they're getting some kind of message, but yeah, that's what I would say.
Right. And in the meantime, Andres, also back this past weekend, I believe Seoul, Tokyo and Washington held their first ever combined air drills as well. Could you tell us a bit about that also?
Yes, these air drills were significant, I think, for a number of reasons in regards of what kind of message they're sending. As you mentioned, these are the first ever air drills conducted by the three countries, the U.S., Korea, and Japan. This implies, for example, there were U.S. F-15 fighters, there were Korean F-16s, there were Japanese F-2s, which is the Japanese rendition for the F-16. In terms of interoperability, this was important because it has never been done before by the three countries. And then, of course, another really important aspect was the fact that a B-52 Stratofortress U.S. strategic bomber took part in these drills. This plane that actually landed in Korea for the first time last week. It did a flyover in the ADEX Defense exhibition. But it was important, actually. I think it sends a very strong message. The fact that it actually did take part in these trilateral drills because it is in line with what Seoul and Washington had agreed last year in terms of the so-called extended deterrence, and also what the three leaders discussed in Camp David this past summer. Now, last but not least, I think it's actually important to point out where the drills took place. The space chosen was actually an area where both the Korean and the Japanese air defense identification zones overlap. And, you know, back in the day when countries tend to extend these areas, sometimes there's been some diplomatic rows every now and then. But actually, the fact that this was the area chosen, an area where both Korea and Japan have security concerns, seems to send the message that, you know, at least when it comes to North Korea and security, Tokyo and Seoul seem to be really on the same boat right now.
Right, they are seeing eye to eye then. Andres, like Thomas was saying, so North Korea has refrained from launching missiles, but it has nonetheless maintained its bellicose rhetoric, especially warning of, I believe, catastrophic consequences as Washington visibly acts to show its commitment to regional security. Do you suppose North Korea's bark, perhaps, is becoming worse than its bite?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we all do. And I think it's been, generally speaking, like that for decades. North Korea's bark tends to be worse than its bite. I think we also have to understand that North Korea lacks the proper diplomatic channels, for example, to voice its concerns when the U.S. deploys strategic assets in the Korean Peninsula. On the other hand, we also have to bear in mind that Korea's bite can be very dangerous. We all remember what happened in 2010 in Yeongbyon-do when North Korea shelled the island, and that cost 4 South Korean lives, because once again, the larger the military buildup, and this is what we're seeing in the region, the more space for potential miscalculations. And when it comes to North Korea not testing missiles lately, I don't think this actually means this doesn't necessarily mean actually that North Korea has stopped developing weapons of mass destruction, or these launches are not only symbolical, they're not only intended to voice North Korea's displeasure, but also have a practical side. This is the way that North Korea actually makes sure that a weapon system is able for operational purposes, right? So right now, maybe there's absolutely nothing to test in that sense. That could be one possibility. And then the other one, as Thomas mentioned, maybe the regime is focused with this space rocket launch that they said would take place in October, and we still haven't heard about it, so who knows?
Right. And against that backdrop, Thomas, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has been pushing for security talks, including North Korea and China. Now, some observers claim that such trilateral security framework, so to speak, would be one based purely on convenience and not necessarily tangible partnership. What do you think, Thomas?
Well, I mean, right, it's not at the level of a sort of a formal trilateral alliance at this point. And clearly we've seen North Korea and Russia deepening their relationship in the past couple of months. I mean, obviously, Kim Jong-un was made a trip to Russia in September, and Sergei Lavrov was just in Pyongyang. And there's obviously a transactional nature to it. Certainly, North Korea has something that Russia wants, which is munitions for its war in Ukraine. And according to a lot of accounts, North Korea has already begun shipping artillery shells to Russia. And North Korea, in turn, most speculation says that they're probably looking to receive or are receiving technology, weapons development technology, perhaps related to the space launch that they're interested in. And in a broader sense for North Korea, just having kind of any engagement with the outside world is something that they haven't had much of in the last couple of years. And with Russia and with China, already, we've seen Russia and China teaming up on the UN Security Council to derail attempts to either add more sanctions or even formally condemn North Korea for the ballistic missile tests it's been doing over the last couple of years, which is a change from policy in the past when they both had, gone along with any South Security Council resolution. So just in that sense, North Korea finds itself with more runway to operate in terms of developing its missile, its weapons program. So that's a benefit for North Korea. Where China fits in, I think China and Russia, we are seeing more of a deep kind of alliance that is really based on something that's meant to be a challenge to the, what they would say is the sort of Western, US-led Western hegemony of the world. Putin was just in China recently for this Belt and Road Forum, and, we're seeing them, take this, be on the same side of a lot of global issues, even the Israel-Palestine issue. They've sort of spoken out from a certain perspective. So maybe North Korea is clearly the junior partner in this alliance, but there is, it does fit into this geopolitical lines being drawn a little more sharply in the past, and North Korea is clearly sort of falling on that side of the
right. And staying with the same issue, Andres, do you see this trilateral interaction, the security front, perhaps, as affecting Seoul's bilateral ties with Moscow and Beijing, respectively?
Well, ties with Moscow are already a little strained if you think about it, especially since the invasion of Ukraine and then Korea implementing sanctions like other Western countries did. And then we have Putin meeting Kim Jong-un in late September and having this summit where they were talking about military cooperation, whatever that means. And then we have this footage that shows alleged shipments of what could be military hardware to Russia from North Korea, which means that, as Thomas mentioned, Pyongyang is supposed to get something in return. We don't know what, but obviously Seoul is not happy about this, and it has already voiced its displeasure with this coziness between Moscow and Pyongyang. So trilateral conversations at that level obviously would not be well received, but as I say, it's not like the ties between Moscow and Seoul are really good at this point. On the other hand, Beijing is a different matter. China is still Korea's largest trading partner, and even though Yoon Suk-yeol's government hasn't been in the best terms with China, the government has still underlined, its commitment to have a good relationship with its neighbor and, the second largest economy in the world. So that said, I think if China chose to take part in this sort of trilateral defense security conversations, that could potentially damage ties in that sense. That said, I'm not really sure China would right now like those optics especially, because when it comes to, in terms of defense, maybe the fact that North Korea and Russia are potentially dealing with illegal trade of weapons, I don't think China wants its image tarnished that way in the international arena, but who knows?
Right, who knows, indeed. Thomas, staying with Andres' talk about how the Yoon administration, of course, is seeking to balance its ties, trade ties with China and its security ties with the U.S., it is seeking to set up a summit among the South Korean, Japanese and Chinese leaders within this particular year. Now, if that does take place, what issues do you suppose should top those trilateral talks?
Right. Well, to follow on what Andres is saying, I mean, there still is such a important connection between, for everything we're saying about the geopolitical sort of lines being drawn. South Korea and China are, incredibly important trade partners. Japan as well in this region, and the three countries together are something like 25% of the global GDP. So it's important for all of them to maintain, a decent relationship. And I think all parties have expressed their desire to hold some form of trilateral summit. The most recent reporting I've seen was from in Japan. They announced, or they reported that Seoul is looking to host it in Busan at the end of November. And I think probably top of list certainly for China, they have expressed their concern about Seoul and Tokyo growing closer with the U.S. in terms of, security relationship and some, economic, components of that security relationship. I mean, China was outspoken about the Camp David summit, and certainly some gestures questioning its behavior in the South China Sea. So I think that's probably, something that China is going to look for some reassurance about, how to navigate that relationship. Japan and South Korea, also it's in their interest to maintain their economic ties with China. I mean, they may have North Korea-related concerns that they would want to bring up with Beijing, just in terms of the influence that Beijing may have over North Korea to kind of keep it in check. The other statements, there have been a few things that have been sort of said in the press. This would be a foreign minister level meeting, by the way. And most of the topics have been around stuff like addressing climate issues and sustainability and people-to-people exchanges. I mean, that's something that also I think could use a repair of some sort. I mean, China and South Korea particularly have seen their relationship sour over the last several years. Certainly the THAAD issue and beyond kind of upset that, and China's popularity within South Korea is really at an all-time low. And we've seen Seoul and Tokyo really improve their relationship in the last couple of years. So it's an opportunity to kind of address those. I mean, maybe the really serious hot button things they won't bring up this time around. I mean, like Taiwan or something, I don't imagine would be on the table, but
Right, issues that create too much animosity then. Yeah. And talking about Beijing, Seoul's ties with Beijing, Andres, Seoul, I understand, is drawing up contingency plans as Beijing stops its exports of graphite. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said yesterday that indeed it does have a contingency plan for this situation being that from December, China is going to require special permits if you want to import graphite, which is a key component in rechargeable batteries. So this measure, of course, could potentially hurt key players in the South Korean industry like Samsung SDI or LG Energy Solution, etc. Now, we don't really know exactly what the plan looks like just yet, but what we do know is that Korea is already trying to diversify its supply chains of graphite because more than 90% of what these companies buy comes from China. So Korea's been trying to get some supplies from countries like Mozambique or Tanzania in Africa. The problem here is that there's not that much room to maneuver because China controls 80% of the world supply of graphite. So it's definitely a situation we should keep on an eye on and see how it develops.
Right, indeed. And against that backdrop, Thomas, do you suppose geopolitical tensions, the ones that we face as we speak right now, are perhaps serving to promote a global drive towards deglobalization?
I think clearly they're having an effect. I'm not an economist to know to the extent that even how much deglobalization is happening, or, I mean, clearly I think most agree that the era of, maybe the peak era of globalization is in the past. A lot of people time it to the end of the 2008 global recession when a lot of countries started to pull back. And it's obviously been accelerated in the last few years with, from trade wars with China by Trump to COVID to, and clearly the the geopolitical lines drawn by Russia's invasion of Ukraine has accelerated that process. So, and I think there are measurable things like capital flows, lessening of merger and acquisition activity, certain signals that indicate how much countries are pulling back from globalization. But at the same time, China remains the largest exporter in the world, is still the largest exporter to the U.S. So, is it deglobalization rolling back, or is it slowing down? I think it's hard for me to say, and I think there's different opinions among economists. But clearly, yeah, the geopolitical maneuvering is a big factor in that. And I think one thing that will be interesting to look at that I've seen a few economists raise is now what's going on in the Israel Gaza issue, that is also starting to sort of, create new sides in this geopolitical alignment. And some countries that didn't seem to be as involved now are having to maybe take sides a little bit more strongly, like a Saudi Arabia, in terms of it was planning to normalize relations with Israel supposedly, and now maybe that's on the back burner. So that could be another factor to watch in the what happens going forward with
Right, of course. And Andres, Thomas just mentioned Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia and South Korea, they've inked quite a number of deals on the economic front as part of efforts, of course, to diversify the market for the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, that is. Which agreements caught your attention, very briefly speaking?
Well, yes, there were in total something like 51 agreements signed, worth a total of more than 15 billion with a B USD. That's a lot. For example, you have Hyundai signing an agreement with Aramco. Aramco is the partially state-owned Saudi oil and gas company. It's the largest producer of crude oil in the world. Hyundai is going to build this gas plant in Saudi Arabia worth $2.4 billion. Then you have the Korea National Oil Corporation striking a deal also with Aramco for in order to establish a crude oil barrel reserve in Ulsan, where the headquarters of the Korean National Oil Corporation are, worth 5.3 million barrels, I think. But it's also interesting, some other companies, for example, Naver, struck a deal with Saudi authorities to build and manage digital replicas of Saudi cities in the cloud. Saudi authorities want to use these digital replicas of their city to run real-time simulations. So we're talking about big data, etc. And this is interesting because it's in line with one of the biggest goals of this trip, which was to diversify the kind of relations that Korea has with countries like Saudi Arabia or Qatar, which were basically based for decades mainly on construction and energy projects. So maybe now more people-to-people exchanges, agriculture, etc. Kind of exchanges can be built.
Right, and more on future industries, I suppose. All right, Andres, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thanks for having us here.
Thomas, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us same time tomorrow, that is Thursday.